Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with SwaggleDad. And in this video, I got this giant size pickup to share with you guys here today. Obviously, with my play on words, you guys can probably figure out what book I am referring to, but I'm super excited to have this book in the collection, open it with you guys here today. And then after I open the book, I'm going to talk about this idea of buying the cheap house in the expensive neighborhood. But before I get into the video, if you guys could drop me a like or comment or subscribe if you're enjoying the content, helps support the channel, doing those things, I'd appreciate it. But let us get into this opening here today. Now, this is a book that I picked up the other week off of Instagram. I had, of course, been talking to you guys about having followed a bunch of the Instagram, accounts, and talking about this idea of how, I've been saying how now is a really good time to basically make purchases, find a lot of good deals out there because of the state of the economy, because of everything that's going on. And this book happened to hit my story, my Instagram scroll through feed. And it's interesting because the last week I made that video where I was talking about now's the time to really focus on books you want to buy. And even though this is not necessarily a book I've personally had on my list or my desired collection list or my want list or whatever you want to call it. Obviously, it's a book. I mean, once you guys see it, you're going to know. Obviously, this is a book that basically every collector would want to have. I mean, the thing is I want every book. I'm sure you guys can relate to this, right? We all want every book. It's just a matter of what we're currently prioritizing. But to me, when this book kind of popped up in my feed, I realized that this was probably a good opportunity to sort of get in the club with this thing and get into the neighborhood, which I thought was really important because this is sort of an all-time great Bronze Age book, maybe a top 2 Bronze Age book, only behind one of the other characters that appear in this one. But of course, the book I picked up here for myself is this giant size X-Men #1 in a 1.8 grade. So definitely the low end of the neighborhood here, but I happily bought into this desirable location because everybody who is a comic book collector, everybody who is a fan of what is to be coming in the MCU, which is obviously going to be X-Men, has their eye on a book like this. And that to me is really why I decided I wanted to pick this one up for myself. Now, of course, it is a 1.8 grade, but as you guys can see, it presents super, super well. I mean, it's got a water stain here on the back, which might bother a few of you guys out there if you don't like your water stains. There is a little bit of staining down here at the bottom, but overall, when you take a step back and look at it, it actually presents extremely well. I definitely think that this is also another book that when I picked it up, I thought to myself, this might be a good, type of book, a good type of opportunity to actually do a crack and a press for this thing, because I do think that there is probably some room for improvement. I can definitely already tell that this has not been pressed or cleaned. I mean, it does have, foxing. It's got the water damage here. So I doubt that it could probably bump too much higher, but I mean, I do think that it's certainly possible to get a 2. Now, the other thing is, there's definitely some spine wear here on this book. Maybe you guys can see, definitely has been kind of chewed up a little bit on the spine. So there is some issues there. So I don't know, maybe the 1.8 grade is totally fair, but at the same time, I do think that there is opportunity to crack and press. So maybe we're going to do that. But that's kind of beside the point on why I really wanted to jump on this book. Really, it had a lot more to do with just the price that was being asked for this thing. I mean, granted, maybe I can give it a little project, maybe I can get a little bump on this thing. But for me, even at the 1.8 grade, the price that was being asked for it at the time was $1,400. I threw out an offer to them. I said, hey, can you do $1,150, which is basically matching the lowest price it's ever sold for in this previous, year and a half or so since we got the 2021 market boom. It took a little bit of time, but they finally came back to me with $1,200 shipped, which effectively does match the lowest price because of the fact that, I'm assuming that some of those other prices that were paid for it, we're gonna take a look at some of the numbers together, but some of those other prices that were paid were $1,125, but you factor in there was probably shipping and tax and all that sort of stuff. So anyways, I thought that I got a really, really good deal on this thing, and I was excited about it because this was, again, not a book that I was ever super targeting. I mean, of course, like I mentioned at the top, we're always targeting every book. I mean, if a certain opportunity finds its way to me, I'm going to definitely jump on it. But this is one of those situations where I'm okay just getting in the club on this one, or just getting into the neighborhood with this one, because of the fact that, when I look at some of the prices or for some of the higher grades, there's a lot of other books that I personally would rather love to own. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the X-Men, Storm. I think when it comes for what the value you're getting in this book, I think the Storm factor is the biggest factor, right? I think that Storm is the character that has the most potential to break out in the MCU, to break out into pop culture, to be the biggest female superhero there probably is in all of Marvel comic books. It's actually pretty crazy that she doesn't have her own like ongoing solo series, but that's neither here nor there. So I do like the Storm factor the most out of this book. Obviously, Colossus and Nightcrawler play a factor as well. And then, there is Thunderbird, but, we don't need to talk about Thunderbird. But again, I really do like that idea of just getting into the neighborhood with a book that I think has a lot of potential for the future, or at least, outside of the sort of investment aspect to it. I'm just sort of happy to get my hands on the book. And I thought that getting these low grade, like sort of entry level copies is a great way to do that. And so this is kind of where I want to take a look at the numbers and kind of spin the conversation into like a different perspective. And that's sort of that idea of buying the cheap house in the expensive neighborhood. All right. So before I dig into this is actually a video topic that I did, a year and some change ago, where I was talking about the Kang the Conqueror book, but back when, nobody watched the channel before. But it's a topic that I felt like was really important to sort of revisit. But let's back it up here and let me tell you guys a little story about SwaggleHaas's parents. Now, SwaggleHaas himself is a creative, right? I like stories. I like film. I like movies. I like comic books. I'm a writer. I've done all this stuff. I'm a creative person. And what's the traditional knock on creative people? Well, creative people aren't usually the best at doing business and making money. But luckily for me, SwaggleHaas has two parents that work in real estate. And they've always been good with the money side, with the financial side. So SwaggleHaas's dad always taught SwaggleHaas this lesson. And the lesson is it's always good to buy the cheap house in the expensive neighborhood. Now, a little bit of a caveat. Can't just buy like the tool shed, in the rich neighborhood that is on the T intersection that is like sitting on the edge of the cliff about to like fall off into some cavern. Okay. We're not talking about like the 0.5 coverless copy of the comic book here, right? Where, we have some standards. All right. So let's just get that caveat out of the side. But the point remains, buying the cheap house in the expensive neighborhood. And one of the reasons why you want to do that is because you want to be where people want to be. And that's really the key takeaway. You want to own certain types of books that it's always going to have the demand side to the equation of supply and demand. If you're trying to get a return on your investment, you want to make sure that you have books that are always going to be desirable in the market and are always going to be relevant to pop culture, so that when that movie rolls around with Storm, or when that Deadpool 3 movie rolls around with Colossus, people are going to be thinking about Giant Size X-Men 1. They're going to be wanting to get their hands on that book. And those books are going to be a lot easier to move in the market than books that are very, very obscure or high ratio variants or 1 in 1,000s, but nobody is thinking about them because nobody cares about Shadowhawk, the 1 in 1,000 variant, because Shadowhawk is not in movies that are reminding people about Shadowhawk. Sorry, Shadowhawk fans. But that's really the point. I mean, one day when Shadowhawk gets an Image cinematic universe and becomes the biggest character in pop culture, then maybe that's going to be the desirable neighborhood for people to want to get into. But until that is the case, we have to make our judgment based on what are actually desirable neighborhoods to be in. But let's take a look at some of the numbers here. And of course, I just want to show you guys a couple of quick things with regards to Giant Size X-Men #1. Now, this is definitely one of those books that it is a as Go Collect has here, 1974 book. I think it's actually credited as being 1975, but this does actually have a pretty high census count. Now, I think that there are some concerns with regards to some of the Bronze Age books being able to maintain their value. We've already seen corrections with books for like Hulk 181. We've seen Giant Size X-Men corrections, but you don't see the Silver Age corrections as much because of the census count to the whole supply and demand factor. So this is something that I do think it is a little bit of a risk with this book, depending on what you buy it for. But let's table that for now. Let's talk about how this is going to be a desired book in the market. Well, we're talking about buying the low end of the neighborhood versus, say, buying the high end of the neighborhood. And we can just really get a quick sense of what this does as far as like a return on your investment is concerned. So here's the 9.8 grade of this book. Obviously a very, very expensive book. Fair market value suggests $39,000, but really we're talking more in the $47,000 range, $42,000 if we're talking about the last 30 days. But let's rewind the clock back to 2020. Let's go down here and see what this book was going for before the market went absolutely bonkers. And here you can see in January of 2021 or December of 2020 or early December December of 2020. Generally speaking, we're talking about a book that was selling roughly around the $20,000 range or so, right? So 9.8s of this book, before we got the market boom, was selling around that $20,000 window. So if we flash forward to today, what is it generally selling for? Well, we got this last 42,000, we got a 52,000, 46, 43, 48, 48. I don't know. What do you guys want to do? Take the median of this. Let's say that it's now kind of in that $45,000 range or so. So if we go back to 2020, we bought this book for $20,000. Now we could basically sell it for around $45,000. Pretty good return. Let's go down here to the 1.8 grade here, and let's kind of do the same sort of napkin math if we can to figure out what the values for this book would be. So if we go back to 2020, let's take a look at some of these values here. We see 650, 750, 465, 405, 720. So, definitely goes up and down, yo-yo, depending on the deal of the day, but let's basically say that the median value for this book is going to be around the, $600 range. Let's just say $600 to make the math really easy. Now we flash forward to today, and what does this book typically sell for? Well, there was a steal here that I mentioned earlier that was $1125. I got mine for $1,200, but here we have a $1,500, a $1,700, a $2,300, and a $2,000. So let's take the median value here, and let's just call it $1,500 just to make the math easy. Granted, who knows where the value is actually going to bottom out, because the 30-day is now $1,100, and I just told you guys I got it for $1,200, but we're just making the math easy here, right? So generally speaking, we went from $600 to $1,500. Let's call it $1,400. But either way, for a return on investment, we're actually talking about more than a 100% return. And actually, I just realized that I think I said 50% at the 9.8, and I meant to say it was 100% return because we went from 20 to 45. But here we are going from 600 to 1,400. And basically what that means is that we're getting about the same amount of value return on both ends of the spectrum, whether it is the 9.8 grade or it is the 1.8 grade. And the thing that is the advantage of the 1.8 grade is that it took me less risk overall to put my money into it. And in fact, granted, 9.8, you're going to get a higher dollar amount in terms of your return, but it's much less risky to be spending, say, $600 on a book than $20,000 on a book, like at the high grade of the 9.8. And on top of that, I'm willing to bet that selling my 1.8 grade is going to be much easier than selling that 9.8 grade, where I'm going to have to go to an auction house. I'm going to have to find high-end buyers. It's going to take a percentage on the fees for having listing that we're doing the consignment. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. And it's similar to going back to the analogy of the neighborhood thing, where again, if you're buying a high-end house in the neighborhood, you're going to have to give a lot of fees and stuff to the transaction of that. Whereas in the low-end house, you're going to have to do obviously a smaller amount because it's a smaller percentage. Granted, it's all relatively the same, but the point remains, when you are in the hot neighborhood, that gives you a lot of opportunity on the low end of the spectrum. If you're actually looking to liquidate those gains, you're going to have a lot of demand and a lot of eyes on that particular neighborhood, which you bought in for cheap. But again, this is not financial advice. Don't listen to me. I am currently looking for the first appearance of Eel. So what do I know? But I have this right here, Giant Size X-Men #1 in a 1.8 grade. Now I'm in the club. Now I'm in the neighborhood. Happy to be here. And who knows? Maybe I will do a project with this thing, a crack and press, see if we can get rid of the foxing, see if we can get rid of some of the staining down here. I don't think we can do anything with the spine, but certainly press and clean, maybe we can get a bump. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. Drop me a like, comment, subscribe if you're enjoying the content, and I will see you in the next one.